Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. And the hope is that as we hear these stories, you will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. C.S. Lewis reminded us that at no time do we ever meet an ordinary person. We never talk to mere mortals. Today we're going to hear from Mary Cockroft. And she has got a fascinating story of being born in Nashville, Tennessee. And until the age of 10, she never had indoor plumbing or electricity in the houses where she lived. She grew up, she became a school teacher. At some point along the way, she and her husband would foster more than 70 kids in their life. And she's got a bunch of other cool stories to share. So join me in welcoming Mary Cockroft. Today it's our joy to welcome Mary Cockroft to Really Cool People. So Mary, let's start with your story.
Well, my dad was born and raised in Michigan and graduated from a business college there, and then he felt led to go to Nashville, Tennessee and attend Trevecca Nazarene College. And while he was in Nashville, he met my mother, and they were married the next year. And the year after that, I was born. And 3 years later, my brother Paul was born, all in Nashville. And Dad helped plant a Nazarene church in West Nashville, which is still going. He also ran a mission for men. And one Sunday afternoon, Dad had me come and sing for them. It was my first time to sing a special. I was 4 years old, and I remember going up onto the big platform and singing from memory all 3 verses of In the Garden. And I must admit, I really enjoyed the applause at the end. So I guess that was my beginning of acting career or singing in public. After we had lived there for after I was born, 5 years later, we moved to Michigan. It was 1942, World War II was on, and we loaded a few belongings onto the baggage car of a train and moved by train to Michigan. The train was full of soldiers headed for Detroit. When we got there, we lived with my grandmother and step-grandfather and their 13-year-old daughter. My grandmother was bedridden with arthritis, and that was our main reason for moving, was to take care of her. So I was 5 and started country school that fall. I walked a mile and a quarter to school, and there were 2 other kids in my grade, started in first grade. I already knew how to read. Every morning we sang all 4 verses of the national anthem and pledged the flag, and the teacher read from the Bible and prayed. And then sometime during the day we would go out and collect milkweed pods to be used for the war effort for making life jackets and parachutes, I guess. So we'd collect big burlap bags of milkweed pods. Thought we were doing our part for the war. Then when I was in 3rd grade, at Thanksgiving time, we moved into the town of Cairo, which was about 10 miles away. And that's where Dad worked, and that's where our church was, and that's where my grandmother had been put into a nursing facility. It was the same church that we had been attending, so I knew the Sunday school teachers, and I had friends there. The first day, Dad walked me to school so I would know the way. It was about a mile through town, and I was amazed to find out that there were 4 3rd-grade classrooms when I'd only had 3 in my class in the country school. But I soon learned to like it and made a lot of friends. I was disappointed that they were just beginning their multiplication tables, and I already knew all of mine. But I soon adjusted to town. I got some new roller skates, sidewalk roller skates, and enjoyed roller skating all around the neighborhood. The neighborhood kids and I would play hide and seek and hopscotch and other things we would play after supper until the streetlights came on. By the way, that house in Cairo was the first time we had indoor plumbing. And I really enjoyed having a bathroom and not an outhouse, and our first time to have electricity. I was 7. When I was in 4th grade, or about 3 weeks before 4th grade started, World War II ended, and there was a big celebration in our town and in our church. when I was in fourth grade, my brother Tom was born 10 days before I turned 9. So I had a brother 3 years younger and a brother 9 years younger than I. I became very active in Girl Scouts and in church, and apparently I was pretty competitive because we had lots of memory work to do, particularly in Sunday school, and I can remember that I won all the prizes. I remember getting a headscarf with butterflies on it for memorizing 25 Psalms that the teacher picked out. They were not all short either. Just before I entered ninth grade, we moved to a larger house, and it was closer to the school. And that summer, my sister Esther was born. And the next summer, my sister Dawn was born. So those two girls grew up together. I was 13 and 14 when they were born. I really enjoyed high school. I took private voice lessons and was in a lot of music, excelled in English. When it was time for our senior trip, we went to Washington, D.C., and I didn't have enough money for the trip, so one of the teachers, my history teacher, gave me $35 and said, when you start working, help somebody else. Give them some money or help them in some way. So I told her I would. Prior to that, at the end of 11th grade, I was given a full scholarship to the National Music Camp at Interlochen in northern Michigan, and that was just a wonderful, wonderful experience with private voice lessons and classes and ear training and sightseeing and music appreciation and the choirs and things that I was in there. Also, during my growing up years, I went to church camp as well as Girl Scout camp. And at church camp when I was 12, I remember we had a lady speaker from Owasso Bible College, and her theme for the week was taken from the words of Jesus' mother to the servants at the wedding in Cana, and it was, "Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." And my folks had also been kind of drilling that into me to learn to listen, to learn to recognize God's voice and to listen to it and obey it. So that was kind of a lesson that I never forgot from that camp. Whatever he says to you, do it. And that kind of stuck with me all through life. I finished high school, wanted to go to college, had no idea where to go, had no money. I worked as a waitress that summer after 12th grade. And the school superintendent, Leonard Mills, also went to our church. And he said, "I'd like to take you to Owasso and have you visit the Bible college there." My dad used to be president there. And so we went to Owasso one Sunday after church that summer, and he got keys and let me into the building, saw the dorms, the chapel, classrooms, and so on. And so that fall I enrolled in Owasso Bible College, and the next year became Owasso College. Later it merged with what is now Indiana Wesleyan. But I enjoyed my time there. I learned a lot from the professors. I learned to walk closer with the Lord. We would have prayer meetings and dorm small group meetings and times of praying. And I learned a lot more about how to pray and call on God. And when I was a kid, we always had family worship. Not only go to church, but every day we would sing 2 or 3 hymns. Dad would read from the Bible, and then we would all kneel down and all of us would pray. And then Dad would read a chapter from a missions book. So I had a background in praying and singing and worshiping, but it was just particularly interesting to me to have chapel 2 or 3 times a week there at the college. I had some excellent professors that really guided me and taught me a lot, not only academically, but about following God. Then I knew that I needed to move on from Owasso and do my student teaching. By that time, I had decided I wanted to be a teacher. When I was growing up, I thought I would be a missionary nurse in Africa, but that didn't ever seem to materialize. So several of the students from Owasso attended Greenville College in Illinois. So I transferred there and did my student teaching and finished my bachelor's degree there. And then right at the end of our senior year, a pastor from Oxford, Michigan, a Free Methodist pastor, came to the college and arranged for interviews. He had talked to the school superintendents in the town where he lived, Oxford, and the adjoining town 3 miles away, Lake Orion School District, and had a list of all the openings that the schools needed for teachers. So 7 of us went to Oxford and Lake Orion that year. So I didn't even have to seek for my first teaching job. It just was kind of handed to me, like the college was kind of picked out for me. And as I look back, I see God's hand was just leading me all those ways, so I didn't have to do a lot of searching, I guess. And I really, really enjoyed teaching high school English. And some of those kids still keep in touch with me. That was 1959, so they turned 79 this year, but they still will contact me on Facebook. That we used to come to my house for, pizza on Friday night, and I would take them to games. I bought my first car that year. It was a 54 Bel Air Chevy, and we had a lot of fun. I guess I was more like the kids than a teacher, but I really enjoyed it. And then at the end of that first year of teaching, I had 2 friends who taught at Spring Arbor College, and they were from Greeley, Colorado, and they invited me to go to Greeley for the summer and stay with them at their folks' house. And I said, well, no, I had already started my master's at night working through Michigan State, so I'd planned to go to Michigan State that summer. And they said, well, there's a university in Greeley, so you can go there and transfer credits back to Michigan State. So I'd never been west of the Mississippi and hadn't seen the Rocky Mountains, so I decided to go. It was a 1960 Free Methodist Centennial General Conference, so we stopped at Winona Lake and went to a couple of days of that, and then went to Colorado. And I was just amazed at the barrenness of western Kansas and eastern Colorado, because I love trees and flowers and grass and all that, and didn't see much of it. And then that first Sunday, I think we got there on a Friday or Saturday, and then on that Sunday we went to church with their parents, which was a Wesleyan church in Greeley, Colorado. And I went downstairs to the Sunday school class for people in their 20s. These other ladies that I went with were older, and they went to a different class. And there was one person in the room, and it was a young man, so I said, hi, my name's Mary, I'm from Oxford. And he thought I was from Oxford, England, and was really impressed. But he said, my name's Jim Cockroft. And so we talked a little, and later that summer we started dating. And before I went back to Michigan, he asked me to marry him. And so the next summer we were married in Michigan, and worked in he got a job teaching in the neighboring school district 3 miles away, teaching music. And he became the minister of music at the church that I was attending, which grew from about 90 to 300 somehow. We were there helping it grow, working in children's ministries and so on. Well, we had both started our masters and wanted to be closer to Michigan State, to East Lansing. So our first child had been born while we lived in Oxford. And then he was a year old, and we moved to Owasso, which was closer to Lansing. And there we began attending another Free Methodist church, which was by a railroad track, and it was under 100. Every time during morning worship, a train would go by, and the pastor would have to stop preaching for a little bit till the noise of the train subsided. But they were building a new building, and then again we helped them grow to several hundred while we were there. And Jim was minister of music there also, and I worked a lot with the children and youth. And our other 2 children were born while we lived there, John and Bethany, and we bought our first house there. Our children were born 2 years apart, and all of them were born in July because I taught school. I know that sounds funny, but worked out that way. Jim said I'm the one that plans everything. We had been living in Owasso. I taught high school at Owasso High School, and I also finished my master's. and was a guidance counselor, part-time guidance counselor at the high school. And at night I taught at the college that had been Owasso College, but after they merged with Marian, with Indiana Wesleyan, some Nazarenes bought it. It was called John Wesley College, and I taught English courses there 2 or 3 nights a week. Then one day we got a call. We'd been living there about 5 years, and we got a call from the director of Christian education at the Winona Lake Free Methodist headquarters, and he said he wanted to come up to Michigan and talk to us. So we agreed, and he came up, stayed all night at our house, and interviewed us, and said that he wanted us to become the new directors of children's ministries for the Free Methodist denomination. And it would involve writing curriculum and traveling all over the U.S. and Ontario mainly, giving workshops, training leaders for the CYC Christian Youth Crusader program, and helping also with camps and training camp leaders. So that sounded really exciting to us. And I remember we moved on Memorial Day. Bethany was 10 months old. The kids turned 1, 3, and 5 that summer. We didn't think that we would be there forever, so we didn't sell our house in Michigan. We rented it out. We really enjoyed working there. I just really enjoyed the travel and training people, and my mother would come down and take care of our kids for us, and we had another good grandmother who babysat there. While we were in Winona Lake, the revival, 1970 revival, broke out at Asbury. And Clyde Van Valen, who was a pastor of the Free Methodist Church in Wilmore, came to Winona Lake and was telling about the revival. And Jim and I had charge of children's worship that morning, so we were not in that service where he spoke. But no one came to get their kids. We had about 50 kids in worship, children's worship. And finally, it got to be 12 o'clock and 12:30, and no one came to get their kids. Finally, an usher came down and said, the Holy Spirit has just poured out on the congregation and nobody's wanting to go, so we'll start taking the kids up to their parents. And so they finally were all up to their parents about 1 o'clock, and I went to the nursery and got Bethany out and took my kids home and fed them. That night we went back, and it was just an air of expectancy. I was just, for weeks, we came to church, and there was this expectancy, and the Holy Spirit just poured himself out, on the congregation. And on that Monday after that, Clyde Van Valen came over to our house. And since we had missed worship, he told me all about, I think Jim was working, but he told me all about how the Lord was pouring out his Spirit. And he prayed with me, and I felt like I really experienced the cleansing work of the Holy Spirit in my life. I had given my life to Christ at a camp meeting when I was 7. I had gone forward. But this time, it was more like I was totally surrendering my life to him. I was in my early 30s. And as I look back, I was kind of amazed at how the Lord just led us to that next leg of the journey of going to Winona Lake, because we weren't seeking any new position. Well, then after we had been there for a few years and Jim had gone on some mission trips and things, we got a call from the pastor at McPherson, Kansas Free Methodist Church, and wanted us to come there, and Jim to be minister of music, and wanted me to work with children and youth. And so we felt that was the time to move, so we moved to McPherson, Kansas, and sold our Winona Lake house, bought a really nice Victorian house there in McPherson. Really made some good friends, enjoyed our years there greatly. But something in us kept pulling us to Missouri. When we had traveled for Winona Lake job, we had gone to several churches in Missouri, and they were small and poor and struggling, and we just felt like we could help. So we decided that maybe we would look into moving to Missouri, and I somehow got a United Farm catalog, and I looked at it and I said, Jim, here's our place. It's 40 acres and a big farmhouse and barn and woods, and we didn't know it had a cave, so that was a bonus. So we went out to look at it and bought it right away on that trip. And we didn't move there till the next year, but we were really excited about that. But about 6 weeks before we moved to Missouri, we had always wanted a fourth child and never had taken the time, I guess, to have one. So we decided that we would look into adopting a Korean. So we contacted an orphanage in Seoul, which was a Presbyterian orphanage, and told them that we would take siblings or an older child. And we then were given a 9-year-old girl whom we adopted. She couldn't speak any English and we couldn't speak any Korean, but she brought a Korean-English dictionary with her and we communicated through that. And we moved to Missouri 6 weeks after we had gotten her. So we had to find work with family services here on the adoption and have a new attorney. And it seems like all through our life, God provided for us. And we knew that when we moved to Missouri, we only knew one person, and he was a pastor in Hannibal. And we knew we would not be getting a salary. And so it was kind of a risk that we were taking. And then here we had this new daughter. And we were to have the last visit with the attorney before the adoption. And we were supposed to pay the last $45, and we didn't have it. And so we started out for Springfield to the attorney's office, and I said, what are we going to do? And Jim said, the Lord will take care of it. And we stopped at our mailbox, and there was a check from a retired pastor that we had only met once, and it was for $50. And so I kind of sarcastically said, what's the other $5 for? And Jim pointed to the gas tank, and it was empty. Well, in 1976, we could go to Springfield and back on $5. So we, ended up adopting Cheryl, and she became a naturalized citizen, and she's been a big blessing in our life. She lives in California now. All three of our kids graduated from a school that we had started, a private Christian school there at Oldfield. We had that for 30 years. And then they, 3 of them went to Evangel, graduated from Evangel. But during that time, it seemed like the Lord was helping us to be available and listening to his call and listening to his voice more than ever. And we got a call asking if we would take in a refugee from Ukraine. It was in the late 80s, 1980s, and Chernobyl had just happened, and she was had walked out under that cloud and with her daughter, and she brought her daughter to her cousins in Ohio, but I think she didn't want to bring her daughter to a strange place. But she came to live with us for a year, and she spoke English. She had also taught in the communist youth camps, and before that, we had her teach Russian in our school, and she was really enjoyed living with us. And about springtime, one time we were having our devotions around the table, and all of a sudden she looked up and brightened and she said, "You have convinced me. I want to accept Christ." And she'd been a communist, prior to that. So that was exciting. And we kept in touch with her for a few years after she went back to Ukraine. Another time, shortly after that, we received a call from the mechanic that worked on our vehicles. And he said, there's a family with 3 kids, a mother and dad and 3 kids, sitting here at a gas station in Sparta. And they have just come from Texas. And the dad does not speak English, and he's from Mexico, but he does have a green card to work. And the mother's from Texas, and she speaks both languages, Spanish and English, fluently. And he had a job in Springfield, but when he got here, it had already been filled. So they don't know what to do. Well, you take them. So we took them and the 3 kids in, and that they were there for several months. And she would get up about 5 o'clock every morning and, fix their special food. I could smell garlic and beans and things cooking. And the kids went to our school, and she taught Spanish at our school for us then. And I had a Bible study for ladies in our home during that time, once a week, and she came to that. And we always stood in a circle, and whoever wanted to pray would pray at the end of the Bible study. And 2 or 3 had prayed, and all of a sudden she started praying very fervently in Spanish, even though she could speak English. And the tears were just running down her face. And then when she finished, she looked up and smiled. She said, "I just accepted Christ into my life." And that was such a blessing to have them there. And then they got he got a job and they got their own place. Shortly after that, we got a call from Family Services in Christian County saying, "We have 7 children in foster care who are siblings, and they're all in different homes, and they're very unhappy, and they want to live with you." They had gone to our school. And she said, "Will you take them?" And I said, "Well, yes." And I mean, it was just like, the Lord would always say yes when these opportunities came up. And she said, "Well, now there won't be any pay because you're not licensed." So we had those 7 kids for several months before there'd been a death of a baby in their family. And the 14-year-old oldest one girl had been left with all the kids, and that's why the kids had been removed from the home. But when they were restored back to their home, the kids continued coming to our school, and they came to our church that we had started there. So that was kind of the start of, we thought, well, our kids are grown, and that worked out pretty well. Maybe we should be foster parents. So over the next few years, we had about 75 foster kids at different times. Several of them were behavioral teens who had been expelled from school either for non-attendance or for behavior. So Family Services paid for them to attend our private school. So anyway, we had some really interesting times with those kids. I think each time I was aware that the Lord was leading us and wanting us to do that, and we were learning new things each time. While we were fostering, a lady who had come from Holland and had been living with her daughter, the daughter didn't want her there anymore, and she needed a place to live, and we had met her. So she came to live with us, and she was a pretty good help with the foster kids. And my mother was also living with us. My dad had died in 1990, and my mother lived with us the last 9 years of her life. And this lady, Sarah Sita, helped, and then we helped her move to an apartment in Springfield, and she ended up at Schweitzer Church. I don't know if she's still living or not. I haven't seen her in a while. Probably isn't, because I think she's older than I am. And then we were ready about that time to retire from the private school, and and I had been asked to teach at Evangel a few years before that, but had turned it down and kind of regretted doing that. But so we were just kind of wondering, okay, what should we do now? And then we were asked to pastor in Joplin to fill in for a couple of years. So we drove 100 miles from our driveway to the Free Methodist Church over there for a couple of years. In 1999, I'm going to backtrack, a college friend from California and I decided we would go to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands to visit another college friend who had started a Wesleyan school there, had about 300 students on the island. And we met in Miami and flew down there to the island. And the next day was Sunday. And I had done something, maybe a month before that was really, I felt really ashamed of. I had asked God to forgive me and had made things right, but I couldn't forgive myself. And so while we were there that morning, we went to the Wesleyan church. We were the only 3 white people in the church of several hundred. And they started out with singing, we have come into his house and gathered in his name to worship him. And I thought, his house. I was kind of cynical. His house that they had gathered in had been basically destroyed by a hurricane shortly before that. They had big 5-gallon pails around to catch the rainwater. And the windows had been blown out and insects were coming in and out. And they continued to sing, so forget about yourself and concentrate on him and worship him and let us lift up holy hands. Then they sang a verse that we had never sung in the United States. It was, he is all my righteousness. I stand complete in him and worship him, Jesus Christ, my Lord. And suddenly I just started to cry. And then I started to sob. And it was just like all that weight of guilt that was just my own, for not forgiving myself, was just lifted. And then to top it off, they sang that whole verse again, and I sobbed all the way through that. And it just was a very cleansing experience there in St. Thomas. My mother died in 2001, and I was with her when she died. And the day before she died, a Sunday afternoon, she raised up in bed and said, I see Jesus, I see heaven's gates. And she started praising the Lord. She'd always been a woman of great faith and prayer. And so, dumb me, I interrupted her and said, do you see Dad? And she was really quiet, and she said, he's coming pretty soon. But anyway, she died, several hours after that, and I had the privilege of being with her. She died at our house. We had been attending, after we retired, Ozark United Methodist and visited Cassidy United Methodist for several weeks. But we felt like the Lord wanted us to go someplace else, and we visited Wesley in Springfield one Sunday morning, early church, and we thought, well, we're in Springfield, why don't we go to Schweitzer? So we visited Schweitzer's second traditional service at that time, and immediately knew it was the right place. We loved the music, we loved Pastor Bob's preaching, and it was good. And we just stayed with Schweitzer then. It's been 14 years, I think. I began teaching a Sunday school class at Schweitzer. And during that time, for some reason, I had a meeting over by Lake of the Ozarks, I think a Free Methodist meeting. And as I was coming home, I was entering I-44 highway at the Lebanon exit a few miles east of Springfield. And there was a hitchhiker, a young man, standing on the entrance ramp with his thumb out. And I said, Lord, this one? And the answer seemed to be yes. And so I pulled over, and he looked to be about 18, and he threw his bag into the back and into the middle and got in. And I said, where are you headed? And he said, I don't know. I'm just going west, any place west. I said, well, I'm not going very far west. I'm going a few miles, and I'm going to go south. He said, well, will you take me to a truck stop, and I'll find a trucker going west? And I said, okay. And then I kind of joked, and I said, well, if you don't know where you're going, it's like Alice in Wonderland. Any road will get you there. And he laughed. Then I said, but you can know where you're going. And he didn't say anything, so I glanced over at him, and tears were running down his cheeks. And he started to talk. He said, my dad's a pastor, and I just graduated from high school a couple months ago, and I dabbled in alcohol and drugs, and Dad, he said, I'm not addicted. Dad wanted me to go to a Christian college, and I didn't want to go. So we had a big argument, and I left home. He had hitchhiked all the way from New Jersey already. So by that time we got to Stratford and I pulled into a truck stop. He sat there a while. Finally reached out his hand to shake mine and he said, "Thank you, lady. I'm going in there and find a trucker going east. I'm going to go back and make things right with my dad." So I said, "God bless you, son." And I said, "I'll keep you in my prayers," which I did. Well, I told my Sunday school class at Schweitzer about that. And their immediate response was, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. You should never pick up a hitchhiker." So I was kind of disappointed they missed the whole point of God's leading in that. So I had to kind of repeat that, well, really, God had told me to do it. And when God tells you, you don't need to be afraid.
Mary, you have carried this conversation. I mean, it's not been a conversation. You've just delightfully walked us through your life, in a lot of areas, touched on a lot of things. And yet, for all those experiences, I'm sure there's still many more stories left to be told.
Well, as you know, we had some hurts and disappointments. 5 years ago, we had a house fire and lost everything. And during that time, Schweitzer Church really rallied and helped us. Jim was in ICU for 3 weeks on the ventilator and had 2 strokes while he was on the ventilator and had a lot of burns. And his lungs were really compromised from the heat and the smoke of the fire. And Dan Servin came and said, "I would like to offer you an apartment for 6 months, all rent and utilities paid till you get back on your feet." And that was such a blessing. Bethany and I didn't know what we were going to do. We were staying in a motel at that time near Mercy Hospital. And then the church told us to go to Dillard's and Penny's and buy clothes, and the church paid for them. And there was enough money left that we bought our appliances for our new house. Later, I had Mary Decker just hold on to the money till we were ready for the rest of it, for the appliances. But God's hand was in that. Of course, we paid rent after that 6 months was up. It was 2 years before we got into our new house. And we didn't realize Bethany would only live 6 months there. And the house was kind of built with her in mind because she was going to take care of us when we got old and then inherit the house. So that was a disappointment, of course, her death. And I was with her when she died. I was the only one in there. I'd had Wesley come in and say goodbye to her, but I was glad I could be with her. And I remember saying to her, "If you're ready to go into the arms of Jesus, I'm ready to let you go." I really wasn't ready, but I knew I had to let her go. And so in just a few minutes, she breathed her last. But, God provided us friends and help, when we needed it. And we had insurance on our house, but it wasn't enough to build a new house because building supplies had gone up a lot. And so after we had come to near the end of the money that we had, a lady from Sparta came to me about 6 times and said, "I make small loans." And I didn't say anything. And then she said, "I make small interest-free loans." And then I didn't say anything, and she came again, and she said, "I guess you're not interested in a loan from me." And we needed the money, but I just thought we'd go to the bank, and borrow. And I said, "Well, I don't know what you mean by a small loan. Do you mean $1,500, $10,000? She said, "Oh, 50 anyway, 50,000 anyway." She said, I'll let you have that interest free." And I said, "Well, I'm reluctant to pass it on to my daughter because I know I can't pay it off, my lifetime." She says, "Oh, no, that'll be canceled when you die." or if she died first, it would be canceled. And it didn't transfer to Jim or anybody else. It was just an interest-free loan. Well, every month when the builder would give me his bill, she would give me that amount of money for him. And it got to be $110,000. Plus, she had already given me free $15,000. And so then the house was finished, and I started making payments. And she said, "Oh, well, how much can you afford?" And she said, "Can you afford $500 a month?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, when it got to be over $100,000, she said, "How about $700 a month?" I said, "Okay." So every month then for the next 2 years, well, it wasn't quite that long, I made the $700 a month payment to her. And then last July, in 2022, I made the July payment, and she always gave me a receipt. But that time, she just said, "I'll text you the receipt." Instead, she mailed me the receipt, which she had never done before, and I opened it, and it showed the payments for 2022 through July, and then underneath it, it said paid in full, and I still owed $91,100. So I texted her and I said, "Are you sure? $91,000 is a lot of money." She responded, she said, "It's just paper. We have the resources and we think you need the relief at this time," because Jim had already had those 2 strokes a couple months before that. And we were getting a lot of medical bills. So God once again provided for us. Take it from there. I don't need to say more, I guess.
Miriam, like so many others, have just been blessed to hear your story and to watch the Lord work in your life in a lot of different ways, from the time of your childhood to then even this activity in 2022. And I've also been blessed to have some ringside seats to some of your other activity. Like, I mean, most people don't know you're an elder in the Free Methodist Church, and you've been active in organizing and training and leading other pastors and other clergy. And you talked about this church and the school that you led in Oldfield, and you've really spent your life in the work of God, and the Lord has found ways to provide for you and to bless you as you've blessed others. And it's just a beautiful story of God's divine providence.
I didn't mention that at 7, I started taking piano lessons. And then for about 30 years in different churches, I was a church pianist. And so now I attend Schweitzer first service, but I go down to Ozark for during second service and play for their morning worship service because their pianist had a stroke and can't use his right hand. I thought it would be a few weeks. It has been a few months now. So
you are an incredible person. I've got, lots of questions, but I don't know if you want to. You've talked about a lot of different things. Go back and talk just a little bit what that was like to grow up in a house without electricity or running water.
Well, at first, of course, it was in a city, Nashville, Tennessee. And we had an outhouse out back, and we lived in, it was kind of like a duplex. Was divided by a fence. The yard was divided, and in the alley, there 2 houses down, there was a hydrant where about 5 houses would go and get a pail of water, bring it back. We had a dipper, and we would all drink from the same dipper. Same thing at school. We'd all drink from the same dipper.
Can you imagine that now with
I know it.
Our understanding of germs?
Yeah. And I remember not liking to go out to the outhouse when it was cold, but I did it. And then my grandfather moved 2 or 3 houses from us, and so I would go down there sometimes. They also didn't have electricity. That whole neighborhood didn't. And Then when we moved to Michigan, my grandparents didn't have electricity. We actually had two outhouses there because my grandfather had a gas station and a little store. So one was for the store and one was for the house. Had a Sears catalog in it for toilet paper. At school, we had a toilet inside in a coat room, but it wasn't a flush toilet. It was just a great big hole. It was like an outhouse, but it was inside.
Inside of a coat room?
Yeah.
Did you ever have the door open on you?
Well, it had a door in between the coats.
Oh, my.
But so I was really thrilled when they moved, and had electricity. And we didn't have a bathtub or shower, but we had a toilet and a sink. So that was really a step up.
That's a story that takes, for many of us, to a place and experience that we've never had.
When we lived in Nashville, the first 5 years of my life, I was in the hospital, I think, 6 times. My mother's prayers, I think, are what brought me through. But I had pneumonia 3 times. I think a lot of it was just the lack of sanitation or whatever we had, And I was in one of those old oxygen tents to help me breathe in the hospital. And I had surgery on my ear, a mastoid operation where they scraped the infection out. They opened up behind my ear and said the infection had almost reached my brain and I would have died. And they didn't have antibiotics then. And then I had something they called yellow jaundice, and later a doctor said it was probably hepatitis B from unsanitary conditions. And then I had spinal meningitis, and I was put in isolation in the hospital and told, my folks were told to burn all my toys. And someone gave me a handkerchief with a pretty rose in the middle, and the nurse told me she would take it home and wash it for me. Of course, she threw it away, and I never saw it again. And someone gave me the Sunday funny papers, and I was reading the comics, and the nurse said, I'll put this in a basket for you for the night. And, of course, it was a wastebasket, and I never saw that again. But while I was there, I came down with German measles, so the hospital dismissed me. I was actually in an isolation room that was a linen closet, which makes no sense. If I was in isolation, why those sheets were used in that whole wing of the hospital? And I remember seeing 2 rats run across the sheets on one shelf. Anyway, my mom had to take me home on a public streetcar with measles because we didn't have any car and we didn't have any other way. So Mom just, prayed me through every illness.
Wow. As you think about your life, you've described a lot of things. You've had a couple different lines about the Lord providing and your mom praying you through. Are there like themes you can point to or sayings that you have that you say even from my childhood or somewhere young, but this has been a theme of my life?
Well, other than my folks would really impress upon me to love God and learn to recognize His voice and follow it. But they also impressed upon me to work hard and to persevere, not give up. Well, being the oldest of 5, we actually didn't have very much in the way of financial resources. So I really wanted my own Bible. I remember that when I was about 8. So I saw an ad in a comic book for seeds, that you could order seeds from Pennsylvania and sell them door to door, 10 cents a packet. So I ordered from American Seed Company and went door to door, icicles hanging down from their porches, snow all over, selling these seeds. And they'd say, well, we haven't thought about a garden yet. I said, yeah, but in the spring you'll really want some flowers or vegetables, whatever. So they would always buy at least 1 pack. And you could either get money or you could get prizes. So what I really wanted was a Bible. And they had a King James Bible with the words of Jesus in red. So that's what I got for selling seeds. I don't know, I was 8 or 9. So I just persevered in that, and then worked my way through college, all the way through college first worked in the library, then worked as a telephone operator. And then at Greenville, I ironed the guys' white shirts. Learned to be really good at ironing white shirts. And when I ended 5 years of college, I only owed $500. And there was a National Student Defense Loan, they called it at that time, and they really needed teachers. So if you agreed to teach for 5 years, you could get half of that dismissed. So I taught, 5 years, and each year $50 was dismissed. So I ended up, only paying $250 beyond what I had already done, worked my way through. Of course, you can't really do that now so much, but it was hard work. I worked as a telephone operator from 3 till 11 at night, walked about 1.5 miles home to the college in the freezing cold. We had to wear dresses.
Amazing.
Get off at 11 and get back.
Amazing. We don't have too much more time left, so there's a couple of questions I want to ask you about. You started a school in Ozark. What was it like to start a school and to...
Well, we started, we knew that we wanted a Christian school, but we started just to homeschool our own 4, particularly because Sherilyn couldn't speak English. So we started homeschooling them, and we set up a school in our basement. And pretty soon other people heard about it and were wanting to come. So Jim's dad bought a double-wide trailer that had been an office and moved it onto our property, and we made it into a 2-room school. And we had the beginning students still in our basement, and we had an elementary room and a high school room. And we just trusted the Lord, that he would provide. And all of a sudden, it seemed like within a few months, we had 50 students in a waiting list in that double-wide trailer. And Clyde Van Valen, who by that time was our bishop of our area and the Free Methodist, came out to visit it, and he said, the kids just come out of the woodwork or out of the woods. He said, I don't know where they come from. But then we built a new building and had that for a church and a school for several years, and it was just very rewarding.
There's a lot of faith that goes into that. That's incredible.
I taught there for close to 30 years with no pay.
Wow.
Jim got $200 a week. And sometimes a parent would give me a dozen eggs, and at Christmas time, maybe a $20 bill. But God provided for us. We also had a cow and a garden.
That is amazing, Mary. Really, really amazing. Another thing I want to ask you about is the future. So you've taken us down memory lane and touched on a lot of places that some people will certainly remember. Some of us have never seen some of those things. But as you look into the future, what are some things that you hope to do, or what are you looking forward to?
Well, we adopted one of our foster kids after our kids had grown up. So we have 4 living children and 16 grandchildren and 1 great-grand. So my prayer is to see all of them serving the Lord. And one of my goals is to write a letter to each one of them, my 4 siblings, my 4 kids, and the grandkids, and tell them how much I love them and, that I really want them to serve the Lord. And I want those letters given to them at my death. So I'm just working on those. And then I want to visit Maine. I've never been to Maine. We've traveled all over the U.S., but I've never been to Maine. So I think my sisters and I will, we for 20 years, we've taken a sisters trip together every fall, and I drive usually about 2,000 miles on our trips. And so I think we will be going to Maine maybe this fall. And then we recently discovered, my sister who lives in Sparta and I discovered a cousin that we'd been trying to find for years. She had been adopted out as a child in Nashville. My mother's only sister had 11 kids, and this one was adopted out along with some of the others. And so most of them have died, but we located her a few months ago and have talked with her by phone. So we plan to go down there this summer, so that's kind of in the near future. And then I want to take my sisters to visit a cousin in West Virginia. And then didn't mention this, but I had a baby sister when I was 20 months old, and she was stolen from the hospital in Nashville, and part of the Georgia TAN network of stolen children, and she would sell them, to rich families. And there are books on it. There's a lot of research on it, and I still have a goal of finding her if she's alive, but we haven't been successful through DNA or anything, though we've tried quite a bit to find her. So that's kind of some of my goals.
Wow. Even in your goals, you're revealing some incredible stories of things in your past. And
look up Baby Thief or
wow,
whatever, the story of Georgia TAN, Memphis and Nashville stealing babies.
I'll have to do
There
that.
is no record that my mother was in the hospital or that there was a baby born. She was told the baby died and they wouldn't let her see the baby. She was under ether and signed some papers. She didn't know what she signed, and signed them over to Georgia TAN.
Have you seen those papers?
No, I don't. Georgia TAN would change birth dates, there's all kinds of research been done on her.
Wow.
She died before she went to prison. Anyway, that's a whole another story.
It is. Well, you have given us a lot to think about. There's one final question I like to ask, and that is this. What's a final word or piece of advice you'd like to share with us, you'd like to leave with us?
Just take time to listen to God. Take time to enjoy the flowers and the trees, the beauty. Take time to enjoy your family and your friends, because you never know how long they'll be with you or how long you'll be there. Mm-hmm. But life is good.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
It's a joy to know you, to walk with you. Thank you so much for joining us today as we listen to Mary Cockroft, and a big thank you to Mary for sharing her story. There's so much to be learned there. I hope you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold and listen to the really cool people who are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is the executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. Until next time, you can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast.